Drahé posluchačstvo podcastu Smrtelníka, dnešní epizoda bude v angličtině. Takže pokud sami anglicky nemluvíte a přáli byste si vidět, o čem epizoda je, tak mi napište do komentářů nebo kamkoliv na platformy a já zkusím najít způsob, jak epizodu přeložit, aby vám byla dostupnější. Dear listeners of the Mortals podcast, this episode will be in English, so I would love to introduce the PS podcast for those who have never heard it. In Czech, PS is, in addition to postscriptum, also an abbreviation for podcast Smrtelníka, which can be translated as Mortals podcast. The Mortals podcast brings topics of death from various perspectives, theoretical and practical, and is based on the reality of Czech Republic and the need to detaboo this area of our lives. In this interview that we recorded on the way by car, I will welcome my two dear friends who form a couple, Hsieh and Ellie Chan, whom I met thanks to the ecology of practices TIAMAT.
Welcome to another episode of podcast Smrtelníka. Today it will be in English because I'm really happy that I can sit in the car and drive my dear friends, Hsieh
Wow.
and Ellie Chan.
Yeah.
Guys, because I'm driving, can you please introduce yourself?
Sure.
Thank you.
Baba?
Hi everyone. I'm Ellie. I'm from Singapore. Besides that, I do a bit of dance. I'm interested in environmental science and also in how to deepen relationality between people. And I am also a co-facilitator and facilitator in training in TIAMAT, which is the integrative approach and methodology of active transformation. That's also a facilitator in training. And yeah, Ethan will tell you more about that.
Yeah. So my name is Ethan. I wear many hats. I'm literally, I wear many hats. But also, metaphorically, I'm a researcher, primarily in the intersection between theory, cognitive science, and actor training. Also a transformative facilitator and a coach. A lot of my work involves, the way I like to describe coaching is figuring out how to get you from where you are to who you like to be. That takes the bulk of my work. I'm also the artistic director of 5 to Midnight, which Ellie runs with me as the general manager, where we bring our ecology of practices, known as TIAMAT, as much as we can to all kinds of different places, really. We've worked in Asia a lot. We've been coming to Europe for the past 3 years, consistently, year after year. And we teach practices for transformative play. As you can tell, I'm a very playful person. So yeah, I guess we're talking about death.
Yeah, we will.
It's great, nice.
And yeah, you said you're a transformative coach.
Yeah.
And that seems to be one big transformation. I'm curious, guys, what's your relation to death or with death?
With transformation
With death.
or death,
Death.
which is also a kind.
Yeah, so maybe with transformation as well.
I think there are 2 ways to answer that question. One is that it's perpetual. So I'm always in relationship with death. And that comes back around to the notion of finite transcendence, right? That I'm constantly in my finitude, right? So if you've ever heard something along the lines of like, you start dying from the moment you're born, that's kind of what I mean. And so in that sense, death is always present. And then there is another way to answer that question, which is the experience of death, right? And this is the sense that death is occurring, and that could be, say, to a loved one, or if you've been at a funeral, which I imagine, Adela, you're quite familiar with, right? Then you're not experiencing your own death necessarily, but the death of another. So there are two ways to approach that, and I think those create a different quality of relationship. The relationship that I have to my own dying as it's occurring has taken a journey from like being something I was quite unsure of, I think, when I was very young, like 5 or something. And I was constantly always being confronted with death because I grew up in a fairly physically abusive household. So I always felt like I was dying very viscerally. And then over time, it became somewhat more concrete and less unknown. And the thing is that in doing that, or in shifting that, the more concrete it became, the less scary it was. I think probably the unknown part of it was the most like unsettling. And I remember staying up at night and wishing that I wouldn't die, that my loved ones wouldn't die, that, you know, and it was almost like a spontaneous Buddhist contemplation on death. And the more concrete that it became, the more that I took an intentional look at like, okay, what is it to actually die? That shifted for me. And then now it's become something much more of acceptance and of peace. Although something odd is happening now, which is I find my life becoming more and more meaningful. And as my life becomes more and more meaningful, I don't necessarily get afraid of death. I don't feel it as fear, but I feel it as actually more motivating. Like, I had a near-death experience on the way to Prague from London, right? And I was like, planes have a tendency to do this to me anyway. Like, even now we're on the way to the airport and I can already feel something like that, where it's this sensation that if my life ends here, my conscious experience ends here, that's fine, but it will also be a bit of a shame because I feel a lot of motivation to do things, even though I'm not afraid of death necessarily. I'm more wanting to live. So in that sense, it's very motivational. When it comes to death of other people, where death is a bit further from me, that's hard because it depends on who it is. Yeah, depends on who it is. And it has a lot more to do with a reflective kind of mode. Like, I think about the quality of the life that I've spent with this person. And the funny thing is that the question is something like, have I lived with this person? You know, and then that's what I sort of consider more broadly. Yeah.
Lived in which sense?
Was I present with them? Did I show up fully in their presence? And in a sense, not hide myself or not be in service was I present with them? Because my sense of it is that if I'm present with them, I've noticed that there's a lot less to regret. There's a lot less to grieve in a certain way. Yeah. Grief will always be there, but I can grieve things even if I can grieve things or people even if they are not dead. That's what I'm with, Baba. It was a bit long, but...
No, that's a good distinction between my relationship to death and my relationship to grief. I don't know if I fully articulate my relationship to death or describe what it is. I just have a sense that there are a few turning points in my life. So death became much more salient when I was having depression and seriously considering it as a way forward, I guess. And then after that, coming out of the depression and then putting that down. And then also with my mom's passing, because she had a long-term illness that took 12 years. It's a neurodegenerative disease called multiple systems atrophy. But when she passed away, it was after a pneumonia attack. her third one. And so she was at home and like fading away at home. So in a sense, it was like I was around the dying, or the dying was with us. And that was deeply memorable. I remember the doctor, because we had to get a doctor to come and basically certify her death. And he was measuring her heart rate, and he was like, yeah, she's as good as gone. It's barely there. Like the heartbeat is barely there. And I was like, that's such a weird thing to say. Like, isn't death like you're just gone or you're not gone? But there's like, it feels like there's a transitory place where you're like as good as gone, even though you're not fully gone. Yeah. So that was.
It's like this middle ground. Purgatory.
Yeah, huh? Can like that one, man? Are you doing your job properly? Yeah. Yeah. So those two, I think, literal deaths have impacted me in ways that, I mean, I see it kind of transforming my relationship to grief. And yeah, so now I'm thinking like, what is it? What is the difference between like death and grief? Because I'm also thinking of like metaphorical death, right? Like now, this morning, or like yesterday, this morning, this period of time, I feel a sense of familiar like sadness and dread and like anxiety of just moving from a place that I've become quite familiar with into another place. And with the past 4 months of traveling, like that feeling has become much more familiar to me. And I see it as a kind of like metaphorical death, like death of one kind of experience or one category or whatever of experience. And then now it's going to cut and then move to another thing, become another thing. Yeah, so that's what I'm sitting with.
You're asking for my relationship to that. It was really, really, like, I was scared when I was child because my dad committed suicide when I was young, and then I was like, it was really, I had nightmares, and the relationship was really like, I was scared, and but as well there was something really close between me and death, as I understand it. And I haven't been really scared about my own death because I know my experience, how full it is, and how much can I live. So there is no like regret about to die, really. But it's harder when it comes for others, for death of others. So yeah, there was really this like fearful relationship in a way of like taking something someone who's close to me. But there was, at the same moment, there was something really close because, how to say, it was the space where my father was at the moment, like somewhere close, like in that space. So I wanted to be close in a way. So by the time I came to like, I want to be like friend with this, with death or this death space. Like I was searching for ways how to be in peace with it. So yeah, I think nature helped me a lot. There's something really nature in dying and burning. Yeah, and then I realized when I was in death walker training, ceremonialist training, I realized that there are people which are able to talk about death with me, and I felt really in a place where I belong. There's always something scared about death because it's graspable for me. It's ambiguous, but as well, it's so close. It's so, yeah, I don't want to like repeat in any cliche, but it's true. Like it's close in every moment because we never know what would happen. So it's maybe distinction, but it's as well like something what brings us together.
There's a way you're describing it with your father's passing and Papa with your mom's passing as well. there seems to be a kind of quality of intimacy with death.
Yeah.
And I think, is that the closeness that you're referring to?
I have the feeling it's what you named.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I never thought about it in relation to nature, but now that you've named it, it's almost obvious to me that there is something about the let's say the natural world, right? If you look at a tree, the tree is constantly dying, right? But it keeps coming back. If you live in a place with seasonal weather, this should be very, very clear to you as well, right? But it is also what we normally attribute to life. And I think that's the thing about life and death. They are two sides of the same coin. And this is not a new idea, obviously. It's a very ancient idea. But I think something that has been interesting to me, at least as a kind of more philosophical contemplation on death, is how thick we try to make the coin. Okay, so what I mean by that is how much we separate for ourselves, whether conceptually or in lived experience, try and separate life from death as if they are very distinctly different things. And, okay, so a distinction is that two things are not logically identical. I think is a fair definition. But we also don't want to fall into the problem of dichotomies where there are literally different realities. And life and death, they cannot be dichotomous. Right? So in that sense, there's an inoculation, or there's like we can't make that mistake, I think. Well, unless you're very self-deceived, you can make that mistake, and people have tried doing that with the pursuit of immortality. But I think there is something about going through life with the intention to thin the coin down rather than try and thicken it, right? And to see them more and more as actually quite same or quite similar in kind. And that I think, at least in my experience, the distinction between life and death has actually started to blur quite a lot. Right? Like Papa, you were saying metaphorically, there's this sense of moving from one place to another. I'm very much with that today, whereas like the person that I am in Czechia will die over the course of something like 2 hours on a Ryanair flight to London, right? And the person that I am in London will, in a way, start to come back to life because I lived in London for many years, right? That there's almost a resurrection, kind of, or a coming back to life. So I think there's a beautiful kind of metaphor there, but there is a deeper intimacy that I experience with myself, with a place, with the world at large, and with other people, particularly with people who have that same understanding, in the sense that not as an idea, but to reckon with the weight and the significance of that idea. I find talking to people who have an intimate relationship with that often very, very vitalizing.
Mm.
Yeah.
What's vitalizing about your conversations with them?
It's something beyond the subject matter or beyond the topic. We could be talking about any, but there's something about the quality of relationship with somebody who has reckoned with death seriously and properly, right? Like they've contemplated it or encountered it either through, depression or, attempted suicide, and they might have survived that, or, a death of a loved one who is very, very close, where what I get a sense of is that they recognize the finitude of life. So they're not lost in trying to do everything, trying to like catch everything, trying to as if they're going to live forever. Neither are they afraid of death. They have a different intimacy with it that is somewhat a little bit more stoic, for lack of a better term, but there's a quietness about the soul. There's a quietness and humility of someone who has sort of contemplated death or has come to terms with it in their life, that just brings a lot of comfort. Because I feel like they're vulnerable, humble, and not trying to do it all.
Yeah, I imagine like when you were talking about the grappling with death, whether of their own or of a loved one, I thought of like existential debt. like grappling with
Yes.
what it means to be alive at all. Because if you had to consider like what it means for someone to be dead, what it means for me to be not here anymore, then the opposite is probably also true. And in that, I don't know, how existential depth feels to me is like I have, like, this world is so much larger than I thought it was. And I have so many possibilities within this, for lack of a better word, like a bubble, right? I'm imagining a bubble. Whereas if I try and recall how I was living like before, it was more that I think the bubble has to be filled up at all times. But actually the bubble, it feels quite small. So like I can see all the possibilities. I need to meet all of them and choose the best ones. And then that is what a good life means. Living a good life means. But after I've like grappled with death, or among other things, then, which also includes like what it means to be a teacher, what it means to influence other people, then it's like, there's no way I'm going to be able to fill up the bubble or like fill up life.
Yeah, it's impossible.
And so how I walk or how I move in that space becomes the new question.
And where are you with that question? How are you moving through life?
I think I found a lot of comfort in process philosophy, or like relational thought of how. So in relational philosophy, death doesn't become a destination and birth is not the start, but both of them are just transition points.
Yeah.
And there are like an infinite number of these as you live your life. Like to ground that. So that relationality helps me to not be so anxious that, oh my God, if I make a mistake, I'm a failure, or like essentialize certain things. It's like, okay, that's what happened. I feel certain ways about it, and then there's still something that's gonna come next. So it's more about, okay, what do I do next? And then what grounds me in how I make my decisions is the kind of person that I want to be in terms of, like I said, I guess in terms of, I don't have a very clear answer for that. I mean, it's stuff like, I want to be someone who is open and able to be impacted by the world without collapsing. I want to be someone who can help others kind of see how big the world is. I want to be someone who is like constantly learning and growing and stuff like that. But that's all like the how I want to move, rather than like what essential individual I want to become. Yeah.
I imagine I link with you want to dance through the life, like, and you choose the music which you want to go through the life, more than trying to be best dancer or trying to go to most dance competitions.
Yeah, that sounds right. Like just experiencing what it's like to dance, and also what it's like to dance with others without having to have an external normativity, or external kind of judgment to tell me where to go. I mean, ideally lah.
Yeah, and this is really because while we are talking about death, the quality of life is always like side topic. Because even if people are in the end of their life, but even if we are like, let's say, young, Ethan, you mentioned during workshops and during like last 2 months, playfulness and playing a lot. How to reorient from doing in a life and trying to fill it up, because it's cool to have all these things and do all these things and be famous or whatever.
Yeah.
And how to turn from this to play the life or dance through the life.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think you're both sort of like converging on a very important kind of distinction or a formulation, let's call it, which is the tension between death and non-being. Okay. So the way that we are taught to think about life and death is like a barrel or like a container. Okay. So you have like this empty container of like 80 plus years on average. Okay. And even just think about this, right? How do we lead a full life? Right? We're thinking of fill it up. We're thinking to stack it with a lot of shit. You want experiences and money and, recognition and respect or reputation, whatever. But the way that we have been taught to think of life and death is there is a top of the barrel and a bottom of the barrel, right? And you need to do a lot so that your life is full.
Or like you need to achieve certain landmarks by certain ages.
Yeah. And so, everybody can go, oh, my life is different from yours because they have different markers, and we all have these questions around what do you consider success? What do you consider a full life? How do you consider X, Y, Y, Z question? But we impose a standard on our lives based on the model and the presupposition that it's empty until you fill it up with stuff, right? But I think, Papa, what you were saying earlier, that was really good. And more the process philosophy kind of way of thinking about it is I think better to think of life and death as a wheel, right? So it's constantly going around, right? And at some point, if you've ever tried to roll a wheel down a hill or you've tried to spin a coin, at some point, it slows down and then it stops. It doesn't mean that, poof, it disappears, it stops. And the game is coming to the play idea, right? You want to play a game where the wheel keeps spinning. It just keeps spinning. And this is kind of like applicable to ideas of pursuing good health, right? Deepening your relationships, keeping the wheel spinning on your relationship, keeping the wheel spinning in your life, right? Such that you're moving. You're moving through it, dancing through it, as you were naming Adela, right? And that is, there are two notions there. One is the Tillichian notion of being as participating in the world. This is Paul Tillich in his book, The Courage to Be, right? We're participating in the world. And play is a form of that participation. In fact, I would argue that play is the optimal grip of participation in the world, right? That the world is open to you for play. And then the opposite of that is non-being. I think the container model of life and death, right, a more hydraulic mechanical model, confuses a lot of people. Right, it's a more Western notion. The East has a very different notion of that. The East is more of a wheel, right? It's why you see it as a motif in like more, let's say, Buddhist traditions. So what non-being does is that it almost like has this sense or a feeling of being, but it's actually just doing stuff, right? So you think about it as like, I imagine if you're listening to this might land with you a little bit more. Like if you're at a job that you hate and you're not happy with, and it feels like, I don't always know what to do here. I'm constantly frustrated. I don't know why I'm here. And so I got to find things in this that give me a reason to be here, or validate my existence in being in this particular context. And this could also be in a family situation. It could also be in a marriage, right? It could be in a project that you're doing, which is like, well, if I have to come up with something, if I have to do something to justify my existence in this context, then where's the space for being, right? And this perhaps is worth considering as a question. In what contexts and scenarios in your life, right, whether in family, in relationships, spirituality, in what places, can you actually do nothing and yet still be there, like belong there, and have that sense of kind of what you were pointing at earlier, Adela, like a deep, intimate contact with reality, a contact with life itself? I think this is a good question, because what it does is that when we separate non-being from death, death actually becomes more life-giving and non-being becomes more draining. But we need to be able to turn our frame on life and death from the hydraulic container model, which is much more quantitative, much more like outcome oriented, into a more process way of looking at it, which is the wheel. How do you keep the wheel spinning and going?
Is non-being like trying to only ever stay on one side of the wheel, and to prevent it from spinning?
Not quite. But the echo of it is there. Non-being is something like holding on to the wheel and like asking why it's not spinning.
How do we know if in non-being?
That's a very good question. I think what makes it difficult is that it's very hard to know when you're non-being.
Is it as
Contrastly, no, I think. If you've ever had a moment of like absolute awe in a place where what is happening inside you is very, very foregrounded for you, is very present for you, and the situation in which you're in is also very prominent for you, and you're not, how do I say simply, you're not abstracted, you're not judging yourself, you're in a place more of non-judgment, right? That's what we will call presence. That's the proper sense of presence. Presence is your situational awareness that is non-propositional. In other words, you're not in the world of ideas, the world, and you're present. So you don't have opinions about how the sunset is, right? You're enraptured in it. You're taken up. I'm trying to give you a lot of different words to give you access points, knowing that no words will encapsulate it because, as I said, it's non-propositional, right? So you can't grasp it, kind of like what you were pointing at earlier, that it's not graspable. So I think death is something like that. Like the experience of death, at least in my experience, has been that way. Where when I see someone who has passed, like at a funeral, I am simultaneously with the reality that they are gone. We haven't started talking about grief yet, so I'm just talking about the moment of recognition. I'm aware that they are gone, but I'm also deeply aware that they have lived a life, however long, however short, right? And while I might not know the details of that, or what they did, or they were really good here, they made X amount of money in the first quarter of their first year of business, all of that goes away, actually. Is that the presence of their life is there even though they are dead.
That's so beautiful. Yeah, I think that's very well explained. I can resonate with that.
Well, can I offer you something, actually? So when you were not even when you were, but just now, right? So now when you consider your mom, right, who has passed for how many years now? So when you think upon your mom, what do you, for lack of a better term, see? What do you experience?
It's cool. I see like fleeting, overlapping images of different moments of her in her life, or in my life actually, which are very different, right? Because she was a really like strict authoritarian mother who was quite like non-emotional at home and very beautiful because she was an actress. And then in the later part of her life, then she slowly started, being in a wheelchair, being bedridden, not being able to speak. So like all these moments, it forms a stacked up picture in my mind. It's like I see multiple things at the same time. I feel multiple things at the same time, and they're slightly like shifting back and forth, back and forth.
Right. And as this experience is occurring for you, are you also aware that she's dead?
Oh yeah, huh? It doesn't seem that relevant. Like I'm aware that she's dead,
Yes.
but I can imagine thinking of my dad in the same way.
Right.
Oh,
Yes.
he's
Right.
not dead yet.
Yes. So that's what I mean by the thinness of the coin. So if, for example, if I ask you the same question and you were, oh yeah, yeah, my mom's at home now, and I can give her a call at any point in time. I think Adela and I would be very concerned, right? Because you're then only looking at one side of the coin. And depending on how intense the experience could be, right, we will call it a kind of hallucination. So if I were to, like, how do I say this, drop you full of DMT, right? And you see your mom like in a psychedelic experience, right? You might lose the awareness that she's passed. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right? And then we will call that you'll be properly tripping. Right? But you'll be in a hallucination.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Right? So there is the thinness of this coin, right, is kind of what I'm pointing to with the non-duality of life and death. Right? That as you go through the experiences of the life that you've had with your mom, right, or that you are still simultaneously aware of the absence of her, right? But she has a sense presence in your experience. Right? I'm using the technical term of sense presence. This is sort of Geiger's work, right? Third man factor, that sort of thing. Where the way that our memory works when we're considering people who have passed is that we live a life with them again. And when they have passed, right, we are still living that life, but it has a color to it, which is also the recognition that they are gone. There is a finitude to the kinds of experiences that you have had with them, and they're now changed and shifted into a different form. One much more sense presence rather than embodied presence.
Yeah.
And if we get lost in the either, oh, this is interesting. So I'm starting to get on the edge of my thoughts, so I might need help from you guys. But it's something like, if we get lost only in the sense presence and we take that as more real, right, then we have fallen into non-being. Because being would mean that we have to actually include the reality that they are gone, and that might come with an experience of grief or regret or peace, actually, right? Or longing, loss, stuff like that, right? But then at the same time, when there is an embodied presence of the person, when they are still alive, right, and we want them to die, or we want them to go away, or we are too focused on all of the ways in which they are not, then we're a non-being again. You see? So like, you're with me, right? And I might go, well, I wish that you were louder and more humorous, for example, right? Or that you are feeling more light, or that you are being XXYYZZ in some way. All of that is not part of your embodied presence at the moment. So I can't be with that. I'm in non-being. Does that help to sort of like clarify? There are a lot of threads converging around like the thinness of the coin, death and non-being. We start to open up grief. Yeah, what does that call up for you? Sorry, Adela, we've taken over your podcast. It's now a 2% conversation. I should not fold you in.
I'm focused on driving, so I'm happy that you are running. It's by yourself.
I think that makes sense to me. Like I've never seen it in that way before. Of like all the ways in which I might want someone to show up differently means I'm not with how they are right now, right here.
Yeah.
So, but is it right to say that non-being is not? Non-being is, I don't know, something like a necessary part of being human, not like a bad thing that we should avoid.
Can you say that a different way?
Can I try?
Yeah.
Is it a necessary part of like feel when I'm really in a real contact with reality?
Okay, that's more helpful. That's helpful. So we're on the road right now, right? And you see how in the middle of the road there's this dotted line, right? And then on the sides of the road you have these white solid lines, right? So what these lines do is that if I'm following the dotted white line, I know that I'm on the road, right? If I go past the two solid white lines on either side, right, I'll probably crash to a fence or fall into a forest, right, or drive into a ditch. So I think there is a way in which we can proportion non-being and being in relationship. So what non-being does is it shows us that we need to center to being, or that we can at least. Which is not to say that, if you have desires for someone to be a certain way, that you should avoid that and go like, oh, now I'm not present anymore. No. That's a very romantic notion. That's not what I'm saying, right? What I'm saying is that there is a nature and function to non-being, in the sense of we need sometimes to be in abstraction, right? So that we can have reflection, we can be rational, right? We can become aware of our desires that are pulling us in that direction. But there is also value in recognizing when one is not being with the complexity of what is here, and then recentering to that, right? If for no other reason than to have that motivate something or push a particular desire up to the foreground for you, so you can go, oh shit, I'm thinking about something else. Wait, let me come back. And I think that's more the dance that you were talking about earlier, Della. Like, how do we dance in that, in the space on the road, right? Sort of move back and forth. Yeah, that's what I would offer. Does that help answer your question, Baba?
Yeah, that's helpful because I was imagining like someone taking, like being and non-being as dualistic, and in the hydraulic model, like trying to be all the time.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
I would love to ask you like questions which I ask every single guest.
Yeah.
And it's two questions. And first one is, when do you feel the most fragile in your life?
I think, I mean, it's funny because there's a time where I felt really fragile and I could not hold that. So I felt like, oh my God, this is like, in a sense, like I'm going to die or I'm going to break down and I cannot hold myself. And there's a way in which now I've developed the capacities to be able to hold that. So I can feel quite fragile, but not have the, oh my God, I'm going to, I'm going to embarrass myself, or like, I don't know how I will ever stand up again. And in some ways, because I have the capacity to hold that, now I can experience deeper, or like, I can experience my fragility more fully. So, for example, when I was like in the worst moments of my depressive kind of states, like I physically cannot get up from the floor, and like my mind was spiraling, my body is like just sunk into the ground, and then at the same time I am like panicking that I will not be able to get up while not being able to get up. And like the mind spiral, I can pull anything that has happened in my life or is happening and find a problem about it to worry about. That was in the past. And now when I feel the most fragile is like when some feeling comes up for me that is either really unfamiliar because it's so strong, or unfamiliar because it's new, or it's a feeling that I've been scared of feeling. That's when I feel the most fragile. But now I feel more agentic, I guess, around it, in which I can name that I feel really fragile, or like even now, like I haven't had breakfast and my brain is kind of foggy, and my cramps are starting to come in because it's like the first day of my period. So I feel like, in that sense, fragile, but also being able to name it. In being able to name it, I don't feel fragile at all. So there's a kind of like almost like a contradiction there. Yeah, that's what I'm with.
Yeah, this is a hard one for me. I tend to experience fragility in a sense of like, what's my experience of fragility? My experience of fragility feels like a profound uncertainty. Yeah. Which is odd because you guys know, like, I tend to find my home in uncertainty and ambiguity, but there's a different kind. It's like, okay. It's when things look too certain to occur a certain way. right? That what I'm talking about with this profound uncertainty is more like, is that all that could happen? Is it already written in stone? Is it already set? And when these moments tend to occur, I feel like all of my options are gone. That there is no room for play, right? That things are a certain way. And I get this with people too, right? When people are encountering me and they're like, oh, like I know who you are. Like I know what this is about, right? And then there's a kind of certainty and sureness that they approach me or the world with, that I'm like, but fragility is not so much a feeling for me. It's like sometimes that can make me angry. Like sometimes I feel profoundly sad and tender. So fragility for me is not really a feeling. It's more a state of being. It's so state versus trait, right? It's more, it's different. It's more reactive for me. But I've come to learn that I find myself in that state right before something matters to me, or right before what matters to me presents itself. And so like if I come back to that example of like, if someone comes to me and they're incredibly like certain, and I feel that fragility, what I tend to do is I lean in. I lean into being with them. I lean into who they are or what the situation is. I look around, I try and get a sense of my bearings, and then the fragility goes away. Like I stop becoming reactive and become more responsive. And then that way I can play again. And then usually if it's a person, that person now means more to me. So that's where it is.
Oh, so is the place of fragility the moment where like there's less of agency?
It feels that way, but it's never the case. That's what I'm trying to say.
Thank you. And the last question is, where do you feel most alive?
Now, when you feel most alive.
I'm going to do the annoying philosopher thing and say that most is the wrong qualifier.
Okay, I don't know how to reframe it. Like, when is your aliveness really present for you?
Oh, don't worry, I'll do it for you, so you don't have to pull that card. That's the thing. Like I'm always in life. Like I feel for the most part in life, which is not the same thing as I always feel like I'm present, or the same thing as saying that I'm always being X, Y, Y, Z, right? That I'm always in being. Life is, it just is. So there is no more, there is no less. And there's a profound stability and peace in that life is.
I think I feel most alive when I listen. Because life is, but I'm not always listening. Or like I'm not always finding it relevant that life. I'm not always finding being alive relevant. If that makes sense. Like sometimes I find like I need to set the alarm clock so that I have enough time to finish doing my laundry before I leave the house for work. Like, yeah, in that thought process, it's not salient to me. I'm not aware that I'm alive. I'm just doing things.
Yeah, you're living.
Yeah.
Even the living doesn't feel very good. It's still living. And that's why I love what you said there, because you're pointing at kind of a similar thing to what I'm pointing at, which is the transparency of living. Like if I'm thinking about, once I start thinking about like, oh, how alive do I feel now? I actually am not living. I'm lost somewhere and like trying to pursue what gives me more life or gives me more something. It's like life is not something you have. You know, it's just, it keeps going. And so I'm more interested in what is the quality of living now. What's it like to be you right now? Right now, I'm really alive with one in the P.
Right now, I'm really alive with wanting to take a painkiller so the cramps don't distract me. Haha, from what I don't know.
Well, guys, I think it's really nice to end with this question. See, thank you for coming to Czech Republic.
Thank you for
again.
Yo.
Thank you for welcoming us and hosting us, Adela.
Yo, check them.
PS, so that important things do not remain unsaid.